Khundadze. Hello everyone, my name is Tato Khundadze. So I work for the Center for Social Studies of Georgia. It's a think tank and which basically analyzes social and economic issues in Georgia. And also I'm head of analytical division at Georgian public broadcaster. So before starting my presentation, I want to say a few words about Georgian-Armenian relations. I was thinking actually yesterday about some jokes about Georgian-Armenian relations because it's very related to this kind of questions in terms of, because it's very kind of characterize Georgian-Armenian relations with these anecdotal situations in movies and in daily lives. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to come up with any joke on this kind of question. But then I was thinking about this topic again, and I came up with the idea that usually it is Georgians who learn from for Armenians, and we are in kind of a very extreme situations when Armenians decided to learn something from Georgians. So unfortunately, we have a bad story in this case because I do not suggest that it is you can learn many things from Georgia in terms of taxation policy. First of all, I want to make some general remarks about the theory of taxation and economic model of which stands behind these neoliberal policies, which says that if you lower taxes, you will collect more money. If you lower taxes, your economy will increase. I think it's economic nonsense, and even International Monetary Fund already kind of agrees with the idea that progressive taxation and more redistribution leads to more economic inequality and economic growth. And when I say it is an economic nonsense, it's not only about ideology, it's also about the vested interests. When people are saying that, and experts are saying, and especially economists are saying that by lowering taxes, you will have a better economic situation, better GDP growth. By doing so, they are just lobbying the interests of the rich. So I want to start with the economic model of Georgia. I won't use so much like kind of mathematics. It's mostly based on some few like statistical questions. But before going into details, before going into the taxation model, we need some kind of general economic model, how Georgian economy operates during this, operated during these 30 years. So I call this economic situation palliative economic model, which I kind of and it's the palliative economics comes from the Norwegian economist Erik Reinert. So I use this methodology to explain economic model of Georgian development. So first of all, these are kind of a vicious cycle of Georgian economy, which was kind of characteristic of Georgian development throughout 30 years. So first of all, it is a complete deindustrialization. And in 90s especially, key export product from Georgia was the iron and scrap export products in the first place. And Georgian was demolishing kind of these factories, which was from Soviet times, was demolished. And Georgians were just privatizing it. And I call this wild privatization, and it was kind of sold as a scrap. And as a result of that, thousands of Georgians lost their jobs. And if before we had some kind of industrial economy in the Soviet times, then now we have agrarian economy. So from the industrialization, we came to the agriculturalization. So if in 1989, before the very fall of the Soviet Union, in the Georgian industries, around 600,000 people were working, and now it was throughout these 30 years, it decreased by sixfold, and it's now 100,000 people are working in Georgian industrial sector. But, and then I will show in the presentation that Georgians now, around 50% of Georgians are working in the agricultural sector. As a result of deindustrialization, again, we have hyper-immigration from Georgia. Many Georgians left Georgia as a result of it, and around 30%, and the decrease of the population is around 30%. So, and it's mainly due to the migration in Europe, in Russia, and in other countries. And again, as a result of the industrialization, we have import dependency and constant current account deficit. So and trade deficit. It means that we are not exporting anymore, we are importing, and around this ratio is 7:3. So it's kind of a Georgian economic model, how we came up to this situation. So next slide is, I brought from this Joseph Schumpeter. So if we want to analyze kind of economy of the country, we should look, this is a quote from the Joseph Schumpeter. So if we want to analyze the economy, we should know and we should analyze very carefully the taxation system. So taxation system tells us basically history of the country. So before going to the slide, I want to tell you the tax reform agenda, which we had during the Saakashvili period. So when your government is kind of planning to change your taxation model, he makes some reference point about the taxation model of Georgia. And this current taxation model of Georgia was created from 2003 till 2012. So what Saakashvili basically did, and Saakashvili's government, he decreased the number of taxes from 21 to 7. And we had before 2003, we had kind of a progressive taxation. It was 12 for the lower earners and 20% for higher earners. And it was replaced by 20%. So we have now 20% income tax for all. And social security contribution, we had before social security contribution. And first of at the initial stage, it was kind of decreased from 33% to 20%, and then it was eliminated altogether. So now our pension system is not actually a pension system, it is social pensions. It's kind of redistributed from the budget. It's not collected from the working people. We had also some changes in the corporate income tax. So now we have 50%, and it was decreased, and it became flat for all. And also this value-added taxes, so-called VAT, was reduced from 20% to 18% by 2%. So, as a result, as kind of Georgian economists and Saakashvili government say, like former government and Saakashvili supporters say, as a result, and they always bring these statistics, so these impressive statistics, which says that GDP tax revenue ratio increased from 14% to 25%. And revenue income tax ratio increased from 12% to 26%. And we have the another statistics here, which says GDP VAT ratio increased from 6% to 11%. If we do not look into the context, if we not delve into the problem, we can say that it is really impressive, positive results. But I want to bring another type of understanding of these improvements. It has nothing to do with lowering taxes, because VAT tax only was decreased by 2%. And when I show that VAT increased from 6% to 11%, it's just not add up, because 2% decrease just could not add so much increase in the VAT. So the same again, income tax basically was increased from 12% from 12% to 20% for low earners. It was not decreased. It became flat, but it actually increased for the lower earners. And lower earners are in Georgia majority. Finally, about the making the tax flat, this argument which is dominating in economic thinking, and the right-wingers usually bring this issue into a discussion. So right-wingers, when they say that flat tax, we should introduce flat tax like in developing countries, and it is better for administration and it is easy to administrate. At the same time, what they say is that we need targeted healthcare systems. We need targeted healthcare system. It means that on the one hand, they say that we need flat tax, and on the other hand, they say we need targeted healthcare system, targeted social programs. So if anyone understands, if the person who understands the healthcare system, for him it's very easy to say that usually it is very difficult to manage, much more difficult to manage healthcare system than taxation system. So it's this argument again is a false, and it's just for the rhetoric. Taxation system is much more easier to administrate. So this is a system today what we have in Georgia. Taxation, like the general picture for your information. So we have income tax 20%, VAT 80%, excise tax it differs, and property tax it's less than 1%, and import tax it varies from 5% to 12%. So when Saakashvili was introducing these reforms, he of course knew that he won't be in the government for many years. He understood it very correctly, and the people who lobbied these policies, rich people and the businesses who lobbied these policies, they also understood that they won't have right-wing government all the time. So they introduced so much so-called constitutional changes to cement these policies in the constitution. So now it is written in the Constitution and in the Liberty Act, which is a law, that government debt to GDP should be less than 60%. So Georgian government cannot borrow more than 60% of GDP. It's kind of a ceiling. Second limitation is budget deficit to GDP ratio. It is 3%. So Georgian government cannot have more than 3% of deficit spending. And also there is a limitation for government spending to GDP, which is 30% of GDP. So usually in the European countries and European governments, they spend more than 40% of their GDP. But in Georgia, we have a ceiling which says that Georgia cannot spend more than 30% of the GDP. And it, of course, relates to the taxation model as well. And the final question, which is also a question of the Constitution, then I think it is also very important. There is a 12 years of tax holidays according to this Constitution. So during these 12 years, we can change our taxation model and we cannot make it more progressive, and we cannot increase taxes. And it is cemented for in the Georgian Constitution. unfortunately. So, usually economists and right-wing economists say that lower taxes lead to economic growth. But if you look to the economic indicators, and now we can go to another coin of these reforms, like another side of the coin of these reforms, is that it usually do not, because if we look to the global indicators, for instance, World Economic Forum, Georgia is in the 8th place, according to low taxes. And Armenia is in the 9th place. And if we look through this indicator, we will see that Estonia we can see in 104th place, Germany is 105th, etc. You see that these developed countries has much higher taxes, and these taxes are much progressive, these developed countries has much stronger economy, much better, they have better public institutions and higher economic growth than Georgia and Armenia. Yes. So the next slide this slide is very important. So according to Georgian, this Georgian taxation model creates very unequal situation for different type of income groups. And this, the tax burden usually falls on the poor people, on lower earners. And what we see from this slide is around the VAT, which is basically a tax on the poor, which is basically tax on the kind of usual people, a middle class. It has higher share in total income than, for instance, if we take this, this is income tax. It basically says that Georgian taxation system is very unequal, and it forces to middle class, it forces to poor to pay more. Because as we know from the economics, the VAT is basically like people, lower earners, spending what they have on the VAT, and the VAT falls on this range of the people. So this is about the argument that lower taxes brings like grower economy to the lower level. This is a calculation from the IMF, and what we see from here, as I said, that from 2003 till 2012, there was a Saakashvili government, and in this period, the size of shadow economy did not decrease. Saakashvili government was removed in 2012, and basically it did not change at all. So even after the taxation was changed in 2005, it increased a little bit in 2000 and 2009 and 2010. So the argument again about that size of shadow economy will decrease as a result of smaller taxes, as a result of flat taxes, it does not add up. It's not true. Again, see another indicator about on the shadow economy. This is self-employment. If we say that lower taxes leads to smaller self-employment, it's not true again for Georgia. And in Georgia, self-employment is on, it's around on, like in this, it's around 60%, it's decreased a little bit. And it shows again that more than 60% of Georgian workers are employed in gray economy again. And it's mainly agriculture, and it's mainly a subsistence economy, which usually brings lower income. So this is very important sketch. So we have a distribution of income among different income groups, and this graph basically shows us that around 20% of income from the wage earners goes to the higher earners, and only 6.7% of income goes to the lower earners. So this is a taxation model, how it benefits the rich. And the next slide is also very important. This is a wage inequality in Georgia. When people are saying that Georgia is becoming rich, and it shows that Georgian economic model just eliminated middle class. Georgia does not have middle class at all. So what these boxes are showing? This is a income. This is a number of share of the people. This is a lowest kind of range, lowest earners from 0 to 500 lari, Georgian lari, which is around $200, right? So around 34% of Georgians who have a wage and their wage is just 500, from 0 to 500 lari. So around 90% of Georgians, 90%. So if we add up all these figures here till 2,500 lari, if we add up all these numbers, we will see that around 90% of Georgians have income, like wage, less than 500 lari. So which means that Georgia is very poor. Again, the next slide is also a very kind of symbolic, which shows that is a result of taxation policy of Saakashvili government and the reforms which was introduced. The poverty level, and this is a poverty line, did not decrease. And it was a little bit increasing. For instance, if we show this, if we look at this 2010 graph, like in 2010, it was 37%. And only after 2012, when the new government came to Georgia, which would introduce new social care policies and healthcare policies, only after that, poverty line decreased in Georgia. So again, this is the biggest failure of Saakashvili government. In his time, when he was decreasing the taxation, the tax rates, when he was making changing progressive tax to the flat tax, at the same time it was his responsibility that the poverty line, poverty rate in Georgia was increasing. It is about inequality, and again, it shows these tragic results of Saakashvili government, what he did in these 10 years. It's a Gini index, Gini inequality index in Georgia. So if we exclude, so what this figure basically says, if we exclude so-called social assistance and pensions, in Georgia, we have a Gini index around 50%, which is very, very high inequality. And Georgia is in the first place in terms of income inequality and wealth inequality in post-Soviet space. Okay. So in the beginning, I said that as a result of Saakashvili's reforms and these neoliberal policies, many Georgians left the country, and there is usually from the economists, right-wing economists especially, that the Georgian GDP was increasing, and I always show this the graph as an argument, counter-argument, which basically says that in Saakashvili's period, since 2003 till 2012, when he was decreasing taxes, making taxes flat, around 12%, we had a 12% of decrease in Georgian population. And mainly the reason for this was, of course, this migration. People migrated from the country because inequality was increasing, poverty was increasing, and unemployment was increasing. Okay, so what could be a general lessons for Armenia? I'm not expert on Armenia, but what could be a general access, because we have same structure of the economy. The first is that flat income tax and regressive taxes leads to higher inequality. So what I shown from the Georgian figures is that, again, inequality was increasing and poverty was increasing. Lower taxes that do not increase FDI, foreign direct investment in productive sectors. If we look to the FDI structure in Georgia, we will see that only 4% of the foreign direct investments are invested in the productive sector. And other share of foreign direct investments are in financial sector, it's in the construction sector, which do not lead usually to sustainable economic growth. And the final point is progressive income tax, and it's kind of a conclusion, and progressive income tax and improving fiscal capacities in parallel would lead higher inclusive growth. So yes, during the Saakashvili's government, the taxation, as I said, these taxes was kind of, revenue from taxes was increasing. But result for this was that not lowering taxes, but improving fiscal capabilities. So what he just was doing that, investing in human capital, investing in kind of changing the administration, making it internet-based. So this is a lessons for Armenia. It's a kind of a technical part, which you can learn from the Georgian, and it's a final kind of point. Improving tax collection is not a political question. It's not technical one. So you need some kind of a political motive. And Saakashvili had this kind of political motive. He said that, yeah, I want to have the like Georgia into European Union, and he made this some kind of very positive changes in terms of technical side, but in terms of substantial side, he made very taxation system very bad. And also one technical thing which you should learn from the Georgian kind of Georgian example is that you should give more funding to revenue services. You should invest more in human capital. You should have create some incentive mechanism, bonuses for the staff, for the revenue services. And also, you should have some higher opportunity costs for tax avoidance and tax evasion. You should have higher fines, legal pressure on the firms and companies which are not paying taxes, and limitations. Of course, for instance, one example of this could be a limitation for the companies which are not paying taxes normally, to limit them in participating in government procurement policies. Yeah, and yes, that's like all. And this is a final point, sorry, again, for kind of time consuming more time. And this is a kind of very symbolic stuff which shows how the problematic is provision of public services in Georgia and what people create when there is no normal public provision. This is a box where people can put books, and then people who don't have books, they can take these kind of books from there, and it's kind of kind of replacing the libraries because government doesn't have so much money to kind of fund the libraries. And the second is a fridge, like a social fridge, which basically means that people who have more food, they can put the food in this fridge, and people who have not, the people who doesn't have a food, they can take from this. It's kind of a redistribution. So Georgian taxation system and Georgian economic model leads to this kind of very stupid models of redistribution, which has nothing to do with the European economic model, which Georgia strives to be part of it so much. Okay, thank you.